Welcome to That Eight, a queer food podcast. I'm your host, Justin Burke. Food writing might look like it's about what's on the plate, but really, food is just the entry point. It's the lens we use to tell stories about people, culture, politics, identity, and the ways we move through the world. And when we talk about queer food, it takes thoughtful queer food writing to unpack those layers. Today, I'm joined by the incredible Jaya Saxena, whose work over the past decade has explored food as exactly that kind of lens, connecting it to culture, queerness, and personal identity. We talk about her path into food writing, how she developed her voice in an industry that's constantly shifting, and we dig a little deeper into her 2025 James Beard Foundation nominated piece, The Food That Makes You Gay. We also talk about where queer food writing is headed and how writers can keep expanding the conversation. Whether you're a food writer, a lover of great food storytelling, or just someone who appreciates queerness and food culture, you'll enjoy this one. I'm really glad you're here. Jaya, thank you so much for joining us today on That Eight. I'm very excited to start this conversation with you. Have
Thank you
been
for having me.
huge, of course, been a huge fan of your writing. So I'm very, very eager to get some more about you. But I think to kick things off, I would just love to know, like, who is Jaya? Like, walk us through who you are, where you are now. Um, you know, put you on the spot and give us your life
Yeah.
story.
Well, physically, I'm in Queens, New York right now. I live in Astoria, but let me see. I'm a native New Yorker. I was born and raised here, and aside from going to college in New Orleans, I've been in New York my whole life, and I love it. I am old enough now that I've been a writer for like 15 years, basically my whole career, and I'm like, "Oh god, how did I get to the point where I'm old enough to
Yeah.
have"
Yeah. Welcome to the club.
and it's like, "Oh, not just a decade, it's more than that? Okay, sure."
I know it's so funny. Like
Yeah,
anytime I have to like fill out those forms and I'm like scrolling to get to like my age category, I'm like, well,
yep,
I'm still scrolling. Like this
yeah,
is not
exactly, just the
how did we
birth
get here?
year getting farther and
Yeah.
farther down.
I'm like, oh, this is sad, but here
Yeah,
we are. But no, I mean, you just said it, 15 years of covering food and culture. And I mean, you worked for so many publications, and let's not forget that you're award winning. Congratulations.
thank you.
So deserved. And you like briefly talked about it, like you knew food was where you wanted to be, but like what drew you to that? Or how did you come to terms of like, I could be in food, but I could do food writing? Because I'll be honest, food writing, I mean, I wish I would have known about that in undergrad because I think it probably would have changed my career
Yeah.
trajectory and this journey that I was on. But like, what was that thing that you identified as this is it for me?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's funny because, right, when I first thought that I wanted to be a writer, I really wanted to be a music writer. That was sort of the
Okay.
other passion of mine. And so I had it in my head that sort of that's where I was going to go. And I think a few different things happen. I mean, growing up in New York City, obviously I had access to so many cuisines, so many
Yeah.
different types of food. I also think I'm the exact age where Food Network really became a thing in sort of my adolescence and in college, and like Top Chef premiered when I was in college, and so it was a real just like this moment of this is entertainment, this is,
Mhm.
something to get into. But I really think one of the biggest parts was living in New Orleans. So my sophomore year of college was when Hurricane Katrina hit, and so I was back in New York, and I spent a semester living at home and going to college in New York. And then I returned to New Orleans, and sort of in the course of those early days of the city really rebuilding, there was this huge emphasis on like what was New Orleans culture. I think there was a lot of people looking at this as, this development opportunity, this opportunity to change the city. And you had all these people from New Orleans going, wait a minute, this is a city with such a specific, unique heritage in America.
Mhm.
And so much of that heritage is food. And so I think that that was an early moment of realizing that food was not just like, I just love this cuisine and I think it tastes great,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
it's history, it's immigration patterns, it's politics, it's, all these different things. And so I think one of the things that I've always loved about food writing is that you can kind of talk about everything through the lens of food because it is such, it sounds corny, but like everyone has to eat. It is
Yeah.
something that we
Yeah.
all have to experience in a way that many other topics, aren't as visceral, and so I've really enjoyed the fact that I could sort of be this very well-rounded writer. I could talk about so many different subjects. I can do labor reporting and business reporting and personal essays and history deep dives and celebrity profiles, and all of that can be sort of food writing under that umbrella
Mhm.
of food writing because by the nature of how food shows up in our lives.
Yeah. I mean, in this career, you won't get bored
Yeah, exactly.
if you allow yourself the opportunity to, just like you said, write about it through different lenses
Yeah,
and open those stories.
yeah.
So what I mean, what I love about your writing, it's like that it has such a gravitational pull. It's familiar and honest, and I mean, honestly, you're saying what so many people are thinking, but not saying it. And I mean, it goes down to like the cadence and the vernacular. Like it just feels very relatable, unbashfully queer to me. Whether queerness is the explicit topic or just quietly present there, how did you discover your distinct POV and tone? Because I know that it's taken me many years and I think I'm still discovering it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I'm thank you so much. I'm so glad you feel that way. I mean, part of it I think is that a lot in my early career, one of my first jobs was at this website Gothamist,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I did a lot of freelance for the Hairpin and sort of these other sort of that blog era of like
Yeah.
the 2010s where it was this very conversational style, this very kind of snarky style, and so I definitely picked some of that up. But I realized, as you were saying that, I realized that one of my tricks to sort of get myself out of writer's block or when I feel like I have all these ideas and I'm getting really tangled in terms of how to actually convey them
Hmm.
is I do sort of stop writing and just out loud pretend that I'm trying to explain this to a friend. Or sometimes I will literally walk into my wife's office and be like, "Can I just rant at you for 10 minutes about this thing that I'm writing?"
Yes.
And it is somehow the ability of saying it out loud, and actually not trying to explain it to sort of a phantom reader or audience, but
Hmm.
trying to explain it to an actual person does really help me because, obviously I wanna sound smart. I wanna sound like I know what I'm talking
Hmm.
about. This isn't about, like I don't like the idea of, quote, unquote, "dumbing down something," but I also
Yeah.
don't wanna be sort of so smart that people can no longer understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Like
You know?
you've lost their attention.
You've lost them and right, and it's the point of this job is communication in some
Hmm.
way, and so I feel like I wanna be able to write beautifully, I wanna be able to write intelligently, but yeah, I want people to understand what I'm saying, and
Yeah.
so I think that maybe some of that I'm glad that it's coming off that way, that sort of relatable tone. Sometimes it's literally me being like, "Okay, I'm trying to explain this story to a friend. What do I say?"
Hmm.
And then that's what I write.
I mean, to your earlier point, everyone eats. Like
Yeah,
everyone knows food, and you're writing like food is the vehicle. It's the medium that we're storytelling and writing about. So if food is so relatable, so should our storytelling, so should our writing. It should be
yeah,
very conversational and communal. When I first transitioned to food writing from working in the kitchen, I had an editor that was like, because I had the same issue. It's like, oh, I want to seem smart and like I know what I'm talking about. And she was just like, Justin, stop. Like, write with your heart. We'll edit with your brain.
yes.
And that just like stuck with me. And I do the similar thing too. I will just like slam my computer, and my husband just knows. He's like, "Uh oh, here we go." Just like, okay, yeah,
Okay, there we go. No, that's the best advice. I mean, I feel like that is when I do find myself in those stuck places, it's usually because I am trying to edit myself as I'm writing, and
hmm
I'm trying to anticipate all these other things, and then you get so lost in that, and it's like, get something out first, and then we can
yeah,
get to that point.
yeah. What informs you of how you approach a topic, like especially when centering identity and culture within it?
Yeah. I mean, I try to do my research. I do love going down, like, a research rabbit hole. Um, and I feel like I try to be pretty open-minded as to where that's gonna take me. I think that I mean, it's happened so often where I've started a story thinking that it's gonna be about one thing, and then I have to tell my editor, like, "Whoops, it's actually about a totally different thing," because that's
Yeah.
where this research took me. And I think, when the idea of, like, centering identity and culture, it's also kind of being very honest about my own stance in
hmm
relation to that, because I think, like, especially when thinking about queerness, I kind of recognize my own queerness later in life. And so sometimes it's been a challenge to figure out like where I stand on that in relation to a story. But then I also have to remind myself, like, I look back on my childhood and there were so many instances of it being there, even though I maybe didn't recognize it for what it was. But I think just like there's so much of writing that's just about like knowing yourself and knowing who you
Yeah.
are and being a good listener, and being able to just identify when someone's speaking to you or when you're, reading old texts or whatever that research looks like, being able to thread those things together, and trusting yourself to, like, tell that story.
But I think what's beautiful about, especially in food writing and centering the conversation or the topic around queerness, and like to your point, like discovering it later in life, but then reflecting on it, like, oh, there are so many indications of like,
Yeah.
yes, of course. But I think for us as like queer food writers, where we didn't have that content, those resources to identify that early on in our lives, we're now creating those resources for younger generations, or even truthfully speaking, people who might be older than us who are just now like realizing. So totally understand what you're saying. Like, what a great job we have,
Yeah.
like that we get to like maybe help someone or help a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think you're right, to that point, it's so much about sort of creating a language. I realize
hmm
that, I think part of it for me, why it came later was because the way queerness was spoken about when I was younger, I sort of didn't fit into any of the boxes when
hmm
people described, what it meant to be queer. And so I think that like I just flat out didn't have the language to describe or to even identify my own feelings because I was, given sort of these limited boxes and being like,
Yeah.
well, I don't totally feel like a lesbian. And so I guess that's it. Like, I guess that's, there's no
Yeah.
other conversation to have. And so I think that like the more this writing happens and the more I get just the more language that people have for it and the more ways people see that there are to be queer, I think
yeah.
that it really does help, no matter what age you are, no matter where you're coming from, that yeah, you have the ability to speak about it.
Yeah. It's the power of language
Yeah.
and knowledge sharing. So I totally get that. So food writing,
Mhm.
writing on topics of queerness. I have my own personal experiences, but I would love to hear from you. What have been some of the challenges that you have faced in pitching stories that center around queerness in food?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Like,
mean,
how do you communicate that to folks who don't understand what we're
yeah.
talking about?
Well, I do feel quite lucky because, when I really started writing about queer food, I was working at Eater, and I did
Mhm.
have very supportive editors there. A lot of my coworkers were queer, a lot of, other editors were queer. It was easier to pitch. It was easier also because I had been there a while and sort of established myself as a writer,
Mhm.
that I sort of had my editor's trust to be able to be like, "I think this is a thing. Let me riff on this. Let me write this story and just trust me that it is something." So I recognize that that's like so specific
Yeah.
and not something a lot of people get to experience. But I also think that one challenge I see a lot, especially when we were commissioning sort of other stories from queer writers, specifically about queerness in food, there's this real tendency to sort of either associate queerness with struggle or to have this sort of like a little bit treacly resistance, like queer joy narrative.
Mhm.
And so, you know, you find a lot of stories about oppression and how hard it is, or you find a lot of stories about like, wow, we're so brave and we're resisting and we're fighting. And both of those experiences are so real, um,
Mhm.
are very valid. But I think there are also things that are really easily legible to straight editors and straight readers. And so there's a tendency that anything that's more complicated than that, anything that doesn't fit into those narratives becomes harder to pick up. And so I definitely found myself, either trying to advocate for stories to editors to say, like, hey, I think this is a really interesting story that is much more complicated than the narratives that you're getting about queerness,
Mhm.
typically that deserve space. Or sometimes trying to work with writers who are so used to being like, okay, well, these are sort of the stories I can tell, to be like, "No, go deeper than that." Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to either show us all your scars or try to talk about it as if like, I only live in queer joy and here's sort
Yeah.
of this, like, beautiful rainbow thing. I feel
Oh
like
my
sometimes
gosh,
it's very
yes.
difficult to pull those, like, we are we're people with
Yep.
complicated lives like anyone else, and
Yeah.
sort of tell those ups and downs at the same time without it having to be one or
Yeah.
the other.
I didn't do it, but, like, internally, I was just, like, cheering. I was like, "Louder! Like, say it louder." Because everything that you just said, I have believed, and I think I have seen it more in the past couple of months. So,
Yeah.
it's so funny. So, like, the first thing I ever wrote, and this was when I was still working in kitchens, it was for Eater, how homophobia almost made me quit being a chef, and
Yeah.
I think I got coined the queer trauma kid, you know? And I was like, "Oh, this is not what I was trying to do." I was just trying to give a first person experience of what it's like in the kitchens versus it being investigative.
Right,
I wanted you to hear from the person.
right,
And so for a while, like, the pushback I would get from pitches was, "But how did it hurt you?" And I'm like,
right.
"Wow, like, we really want us to sit in our trauma, don't you? Like,
Yeah,
this is sad." And then, like, to your point, then it flipped and they were like, "How did you resist and how are you, like, joyful or, like, this the opposite extreme?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I am, but not 24/7, 7 days a week." Like, this
yeah,
is
and it's
um
so hard because, right, bringing that personal experience into it, I mean, I get it, that does often, make it relate to a reader more than
Mhm.
statistics, more than sort of that reporting can. But yeah, I think it's so I saw this a lot in sort of sort of the feminist blogosphere as well, where it was a lot of just being like, women write a personal essay for $50 about the worst thing that's ever happened to you.
Yeah.
Write about, your sexual assault, your eating disorder, or,
Mhm.
discrimination at work, all these things, and it doesn't make it any less real. It doesn't make it any less necessary to tell those stories, but I think that yeah, it's very easy to get stuck, and very
Yeah.
easy to then have that be all that anyone winds up expecting from queer storytelling.
Yeah. When the cookbook came out and I was, like, talking to, like, publications, I was just like, "This like, we need to talk about, like, lived in queer experiences, like moments of grief because you lost a sibling or a parent, or moments of just being a Tuesday." And,
Yeah.
like, my husband and I, we would just write down terms that we think we could use that would resonate with who we were talking to and pitching to. And there came to a point I was like, as much as I dislike this word, like queer domestic life, like,
Yeah.
because media loves to put us in a third space. They're like, oh, the queers are in restaurants, bars, and nightlife. Very important to our community and to our livelihoods. But there is also stuff that happens at home. And I think what I would love to see in queer food writing is more queerness at home. Who is
Yeah.
our chosen family? What does our lived in lives look like? We go to work, just all these things.
Yeah.
And it's like everything that you're saying, I'm like, yes, like there's so much more.
There's so much more. And I feel like, and that idea of like domesticity doesn't, it's not even incongruous with the idea of nightlife or the
Mhm,
idea of all these other things. I mean, I think about, as it's so funny, as soon as you say that, was it Eric Piepenberg came out with that book, Dining Out, this year?
such a good book.
Such a good book, all about, just sort of gay restaurants in the
Mhm,
US, and I remember there was one. I'm totally forgetting the name of the restaurant now, but there was one scene that he wrote about where it would sort of be like after these ACT UP meetings in New
mhm,
York, sort of everybody moving from like the gay and lesbian center offices where they were meeting
mhm.
into a restaurant and just sort of continuing the organizing conversations and continuing that stuff over dinner. And to me, that seemed so, that wasn't about like, oh, we're hitting the hottest new gay
Right.
restaurant. This was about, we found this sort of diner that'll let us hang out until 2 in the morning.
Mhm.
And so this group of us that really is this family and this organizing group is going to go and just keep talking and keep hanging out. And that
Yeah.
felt, even though it took place in a restaurant, felt like such a domestic scene to me, and just so writing like that, I mean, yeah, I
Yeah.
think it just hit exactly what you're talking about, that moment of, yeah, it's not all about sort of that, I guess, cosmopolitan living that
Well,
we're all.
it's what mainstream media has portrayed us as, which
Yeah,
has I think you have to, like, dissect this, what I'm about to say, but mainstream media put our community in a space that made it safe for people to approach and understand. It's done a disservice to us because it's made us into caricatures and tropes, but we know as a community, I'm like, well, that is just like a sliver of who we are and
yeah.
what makes us our community. I feel like you and I can talk about this for hours. So, but that kind of leads me into the next question. You were nominated for 2025 James Beard Foundation Award for your eater piece, "The Food That Makes You Gay." Freaking loved it.
I still can't believe
I
they
mean,
let me get away with that headline. It's
it's so good, and I mean, it is thoughtful, it's provoking, it's layered. I mean, like you said, you did your research. Like there are facts, like you pull in different POVs. And what I love about it too is you don't make a statement or a question and then just like move on to the next thing. Like you're like, nope, now we're going to talk about it. And I mean, it rightfully so should have been nominated,
Oh,
and I'm
thank
so glad it
you.
was. So congratulations. But I would love for you, for those who are listening that did not read it yet, which you should. We'll make sure you have the link to it. But can you describe the core idea of that piece and
Yeah.
where it came from?
It's such a weird piece, and this was definitely a piece where I sort of told my editor, like, "I think these things are connected, please just let me, like, go in on
Yeah.
that, and then I promise you I will figure it out." But I think that ultimately it's kind of about this particular part of queer phobia and really transphobia, that's like this fear of the queer body and sort of the
Hmm.
mutable body and how that appears in food. And so it sort of started because I mean, I think we probably both grew up with this, but I started seeing it happen again as like the rise of more right-wing culture. You'd see men joking about like not eating bananas or ice cream or these sort of phallic foods in public because, they're like that's gay. That,
Yeah.
you like, why are you as a man eating a banana in public? sort of thing. And then, realizing like what they really mean by that is that this is like a feminizing act. It is, kind of it's not just why are you as a man eating a banana because that looks like you're giving a blowjob, but the idea that like a man shouldn't be giving a blowjob, a woman should be giving a blowjob. Why are
Yeah.
you, lowering yourself that way? And
Yeah.
so first, it's like looking at the history of how this fear has been expressed in food. But then I also realize, like, one of the other things I touch on is right, the fear of men eating soy because they think it's estrogenizing and that it's going to make you grow breasts.
Hmm.
Um, which is a fear of a trans body. This is a fear that your body could change based on what you ate, and then tying that to the long history of people who have actively tried to change and queer their bodies and use food to do so, and the idea that food could be used to do this. And so I think I just really wanted to talk about, this pervasive fear of your body being changed, and to remind people like the body can change.
Hmm.
People are actively changing their bodies all the time. Trans people are actively changing their bodies and it works. You can change your body, you can change your sex, and here's sort of how food connects to that.
Yeah. There was a line that I loved so much, and some people may have just like read over it and be like, "Oh, fact." It was something like, you know how you just said like there are foods where like, "Oh, that's a gay food. Like, don't eat that. It's so gay." But you're like, Seems like there's not really a lesbian food,"
Yes.
you know? And I was just like, fuck yeah, like, that is not saying, like, that there need like, we need to have like, if you're gonna call food gay, you need to call it lesbian, but, like, I mean, I literally stopped while reading it, and I just focused on that, like.
Well, I think it was so funny thinking about in this piece, right, the threat that everyone is talking about when they're talking about the foods that make you gay is a food that takes, a cisgender straight man and
Mhm.
makes him less so. And so we sort of have this very unipolar idea of sex and gender where it's like cis straight white men at the top and everybody else sort of on the ladder somewhere below that. And so I think that there if you're a woman and you're eating, a food that is stereotypically masculine, if you're eating a steak, if you're drinking straight whiskey, I don't know. I'm like, what do straight men eat? Like these
Yeah.
these sorts of stereotypical things, like, nobody is accusing you necessarily of being masculinized by
Mhm.
that. If anything,
Yeah.
I feel like there are a lot of women where it's like, "Well, isn't she so cool because she's, like, eating a cheeseburger like one of the guys?" Like, that whole cool girl
Yeah.
idea.
Also, I feel like too, straight men, when they see that with, like, straight whiskey, they're just like, "Yeah," like,
Yeah.
I'm just like, "Did we just sexualize this? Like, what's
Yeah.
happening here? Like, what the
It's
fuck?"
so funny. I mean, right, there is so much more to be written about how food is gendered in all these different
Mhm.
ways. And so but I think that right, there is not necessarily a food that a woman is gonna walk down the street eating and someone's gonna go, "Ooh, she's a lesbian." One of the guys on Fox News was like, "I won't eat soup in public because
Oh, yeah.
that's, like, too gay," and it's like, "Okay, well, I'm sorry for you
Yeah.
not being able to enjoy."
There's a lot of great soup out there.
Yeah. And it's also this fear is causing people to sort of, like, undermine their own pleasure. It's like,
Mhm.
"Really? You're not gonna eat ice cream? You're not gonna eat
Yeah.
soup, because this is what you're afraid of? Like, I don't know, loosen up."
Then they're missing the introduction and the appreciation of different types of cuisines from different cultures, and then they're, like, putting negative connotations and stereotypes to these different cuisines because they are like, "Well, that's too gay for me." Like,
Yeah.
that's gay food, and then that's associated with that cuisine, and it's just, like, this very aggravating
Yeah.
mindset.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, I mean, the way you wrote it, the information, like, the facts, the argument, your point of view, it was beautiful.
Thank
And I just wanna know, where were you the day you found out that it got nominated?
Oh my god.
Like, what was that feeling?
I was literally about to start I was in the middle of union bargaining. I was a shop steward at, the Vox Media Union when I was at Eater, and I was in a big conference room there. We were literally about to start our meeting for the day, and I saw that the nominations were up. I know that we had submitted the piece, for recognition.
Yeah,
And, I scrolled down and I saw it and I just, I completely freaked out and I called my parents and called my wife and absolutely could not pay attention to anything going on that meeting for at least the first hour because
yeah,
I was just so excited. Um, it didn't end up winning, but I think I was just so happy that this very, to me, kind of meandering, strange piece that, again, it's not a piece about queer oppression. It's not a piece about queer joy, or, I mean, it's both of those things, and it's
yeah,
not only about any of those things. Um, I think I'm just really happy that it has been resonating with people.
yeah. I can only imagine how you felt. But speaking of queer food, let's ask the question that all queer food professionals get asked that we're like, "Ooh." Because I actually really enjoy answering or being asked, like, "What is queer food to me?" Because
Yeah.
I think, to me, I just like to hear other people's experience with it. So, what is queer food to you? How do you experience it?
I know, right? It feels like such an impossible question. It feels like a
Mhm.
question with no one answer because I
Yeah,
always think of it's in comparison to sort of other aspects of food culture. Right? It's like there's not like one country that we all come from. We don't all cook the same way. We don't all cook, period. I feel like it's such an interesting thing because I'm always curious about the question of like what ties together a community if you take away the idea of oppression, like what makes us a community if it's not like a shared sort of enemy.
yeah,
And I realized, like, I don't even know what that has to do with queer food, but I think part of queer food is like, well, what is queerness? What is this thing that, like, ties us together? Some of it's a you know it when you see it thing, some of it's just an attitude that is brought to the food, whether that's in the home or in a restaurant. I think something that I really love is that, we've kind of been in this foodie moment for a while where people say that they respect and are curious about a chef's influences. And I think we are slowly, slowly getting to a point where queerness can be named as an influence the same way that, like, a country of origin can be named as an influence or, a chef's previous restaurants can be named as an influence or something like that. I think queer food is just about being able to be honest about who you are and all your life experiences that you're, like, bringing to literally
mhm,
to the table, and it's definitely been slow. I mean, I think you still have so many chefs out there who are very vocal about the influence of their race or immigration status or the city that they live in or something, and then, maybe do not talk about their queerness the same way that they talk about
mhm,
these other aspects of their identity. So, but I think it's slowly happening more, and I don't know. I think queer food is just about investigating and questioning stereotypes and traditions. I
yeah,
think that, whatever assumptions people have about food, so often what it means to be queer is going, well, that's not what my life looks like. That's not what my
yeah,
experiences look like. The whole idea of having a found family is saying that, hey, the things that we are told to value, I am applying those values in this different way. So much of it I think really, yeah, is just the attitude that someone brings to what they make.
yeah. My interest currently, and I think probably forever, is just when we talk about queer food, like, to your point, like, so many people want a tangible thing, and I'm just like,
Mhm.
"It's not tangible."
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's not a thing, but I would love to see more, especially as, like, queer food gains more of a footing in food media and publication, is and I think it will help so many people understand just queerness, queer and trans community better
Yeah.
is to see how how queerness and food intersects across like cultures, race, gender, like so many things. Because to me, and I always think about this, I'm like, okay, there are religions where the mother of the family is the only one who can cook the dinner that is associated with like the specific holiday in
Yeah.
their religion. But then you have a child who is queer, queer male, partnered, they have a family and they are still honoring that holiday and
Yeah.
they are ones cooking that meal. That immediately is queer food because they
Yeah.
rewrote it, you know? And I just think if we like, I would love to explore more of that. Like, I would love to see that exploration of that definition of queer food, that other side
Yeah.
of it, versus us getting together advocating for change because we all got together and ate pizza together.
Yeah.
That's queer food. I mean, that is queer food, but I mean, those are just different parts. There's just so many different parts and,
Yeah.
that all make up queer food. And that's why I always think like there's not a right answer and there's not one answer. It's kind of like who we are in our community. Like there's so many different versions of us, and it's what's
Yeah.
kind of cool about it.
Yeah.
Kind of going off of that, like in your own personal queerness and around food, how have you found yourself rewriting traditions or rituals or memories of your upbringing that have intersected with your queerness? How have you
Yeah.
been like, I love this so much, but now I'm doing it this way and now it's queer?
Yeah, yeah. I realize that like in terms of sort of rewriting tradition, and I realize that this wasn't necessarily my tradition, but my wife's family is Jewish, and so
Hmm.
I would often go to her family's seders, which were these very, casual, got the Maxwell House Haggadah and sort of reading through the whole story to kind of rushing through to get to the meal and not really paying attention. Her family's not that religious. But then maybe about a decade ago, started going to our friends, a queer couple, were hosting a Seder for all their friends. And going to theirs where it was this incredibly, like, anti-Zionist tradition where everyone they invited were encouraged to sort of bring their own readings, and reading through this story about persecution and community and sort of this lesson of how no one is free until we're all free. They really emphasized that this isn't just a story that you flip through in order to
Hmm.
get to the meal, that this has a very resonant message, and that we can do this in a way that celebrates our own values, and that we can actually hear this message and have this amazing time together sharing in that. And then, yes, also being able to eat sort of fantastic food that everyone's brought and get really drunk on Slivovitz and, all that stuff.
Yes.
And so I just feel suddenly this thing when you're surrounded by other queer people and other people of color and people of all different faiths,
Hmm.
I was like, wow, okay, this is really a queering of this tradition. And then I also feel like my parents are divorced, and I realized something I actually feel very lucky in is that it meant that I never grew up with a particular focus sort of on the nuclear family.
Hmm.
My parents always had friends around that were as close as family members, and my step siblings and our neighbors, the building that my mom and I grew up in, I believe it was 5 apartments, and it was all gay men except for us. So,
It's amazing.
this sort of so realizing that, right, when it came time to the holidays, when it came time to who you invite over, there was never a question that friends and neighbors and people you weren't directly related to would be part of the table. And so I do
Hmm.
feel very lucky that that was sort of always the sensibility that I grew up with, and that that's something I get to carry on to be like, well, why would I exclude someone just because they're not blood related to me?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. My parents were also divorced, and I lived in a very, very interesting dynamic. Like, my
Yeah.
birth father basically disappeared, but his family took my mom and I in and like but I didn't see my mom's side of the families. It was just a very
Oh,
interesting
wow.
dynamic. And it really taught me kind of what you said. Like, I didn't have these guardrails of what family looked like.
Yeah.
It was very fluid. And I don't think I mean, as a child, I was like, it was chaotic because sometimes I'm like, who are you? Like,
Yeah.
how are we? But now as an adult, I really do see how that helped me appreciate relationships,
Yeah.
regardless of what we define them as,
Yeah.
like the importance of nurturing a relationship, whether or not they're blood or not,
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
so important.
exactly.
But just got a few more questions for
Yeah.
you. What advice would you give to like young queer food writers who are trying to pitch something that is like very queer centered, that's like intersectional, identity rooted? Like any advice for them of
Yeah.
like how to even approach that?
Oh, it's so rough, and I feel like by the time I give any advice, the industry is gonna change again. It's
It's gonna
just
change. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
fast moving. I mean, yeah, like, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes it seems very bleak out there. I think especially a lot of established food media outlets are unfortunately pulling back on that kind of storytelling, but I
Yeah.
also think that means that, if you're looking to place those kinds of stories, I think you have an opportunity to look outside of traditional food media and find other places. For every sort of traditional outlet that's folded or that's, shrunk, there are all these cool food zines and
Mhm.
things out there. There are these new, worker-owned outlets and newsletters and all these places that are looking for great stories, and maybe they're not explicitly, a food publication, but then that also goes back to what we were talking about before. Like a food story can be so many different things. A food story can be a business story. A food story can
Mhm.
be, a poem or a personal essay. A food story can be, um, something about landscape, something about travel,
Yeah.
something about agriculture, all these different things. And so I do think it's more just about being creative about where you think that home could be and looking at the places that are maybe they're smaller, maybe they're scrappier, but they're doing such interesting things.
Yeah, I think too, like to your point, I think and I've really been in this mindset lately of queer food specifically is if we as food writers can step outside of our food bubble and realize that a lot of the queer and trans community don't even know, maybe never heard of queer food, but don't necessarily know that they can find queerness in these like legacy food publications.
Yeah.
So, like, if you wanna tell these stories, try queer media, like, go there.
Yeah.
You're gonna I think you're gonna face your own, challenges because they don't typically write, like, about food, but, like, to your point, if you can intersect it with other aspects of life, like business and, like, everything you were saying, like, that is, I think, where young writers are gonna see more success.
Yeah.
And the newsletters and the zines, like, they're putting out some fantastic stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I wish I had a paycheck where I could subscribe to all these newsletters and
Yeah, no, that's the problem because there's only so many subscriptions that any one person can,
yeah.
reasonably afford, but I think that, there really is amazing work happening outside of sort of the big mainstream publishers.
Mhm.
And, and right, looking into queer media or looking into places that may not traditionally publish a food story. But I think there's so many ways around that. And there's so many ways to sort of frame what you want to write about. That I don't know, hopefully gets it noticed that way.
Yeah. I mean, from writer to writer, folks, like, it can be super exhausting
It's so
and, like
hard.
and dehumanizing at sometimes because you become so passionate and especially when you're, like, pitching a story that you're very connected to, like, I've just had to learn how to, like, get that emotion out of it, and, like,
Yeah.
this isn't personal.
Yeah.
It's not a good fit.
I feel like and there are a million reasons. I mean,
Mhm.
I think that, like, right, so many of these publications maybe just don't have the budget, I think that yeah, the money question, it's like, maybe the editor would really love to commission that, but just flat out can't pay you and there's a money
Mhm.
issue. Maybe, sometimes it certainly happens where maybe they've commissioned something similar, or maybe there's a million different things that happen behind the scenes that have nothing to do with the quality of the work or the
Yeah.
quality of the pitch. But
Yeah.
yeah,
There's a lot of nuances that we
it's
don't
so
that
hard
we're not
to
exposed to.
yeah.
Okay, just 2 more questions. If you had a crystal ball, where do you think queer food culture, might look like in the next 3 to 5 years? Like, and
Oof,
not just in restaurants and bars, but, like, the whole
everything.
ecosystem of queer food, right, of, like, queer food culture.
I mean, like, obviously, we're not in a great moment for queerness in this
Yeah.
country.
Yep. Nope.
I feel like there's all this awful legislation around especially transness, and, I also think that legislation like, maybe COSA will have an effect on what stories get published if it affects,
Mhm.
what it looks like to be queer online. But I
Yeah.
also think like, I obviously have to hope that it gets better. Um, and I do think what's interesting to me about queer food is that, right, you think just this past year you had right, we mentioned Eric's book and also obviously John Birdsall's book, What is
Mhm.
Queer Food, gets published. There was also who what was it? Oh yeah, Queers at the Table was published. I think the concept of queer food is hitting the mainstream now. Obviously, I think we still have to question and talk about what queer food is, but we're a little bit past having to explain ourselves in terms of saying that queer food is a thing. Or at least when we do
Mhm.
it, we can say, here are multiple books that have been published on the subject. And so
Right.
I do think that, right, the idea of queer food hitting more of a mainstream, that just means that more and more people are gonna have that framework and gonna have that language to approach their stories, to approach, themselves and their own lives. And so I'm hoping that it means that we get more of it, or that more
Mhm.
people are just able to like see this aspect of the story. Um and obviously, yes, there have definitely been a lot of restaurants and bars explicitly identifying as queer restaurants and bars or serving queer food, and I hope that that continues as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's now just so much more of a known entity. You can say queer food and people certain people in food media know what you're talking about, don't look at you like you're crazy, and,
Yeah.
I think that's huge.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, like, the foundation of, like, explaining what queer food is has been
Yeah.
laid. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think we can define it any further. We need
Yep.
to, like, it's a thing, but to your point, now we need to add the layers to it. Now we need to see it, like, section off and branch out into these different point of views and the intersections of different communities and places and people. And yeah, I'm hopeful that we can just jump right in and start talking about it versus like giving like a chapter of backstory of
Yeah.
like what it is.
Yeah.
But no, we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see.
We will
We'll
see.
come back in 5 years and discuss if the prediction was right.
Absolutely.
Um, okay, last question. It's the question I'll ask every guest. I'm a firm believer that as queer food professionals, we could always do a better job of lifting each other up and sharing our platforms and opening doors. So, who are 2 or 3 queer food voices? Those can be writers, creators, chefs, food stylists, photographers, like anyone that is in the food world that intersects with queerness. Who do you think we should know? And yeah, we'll share
Yeah.
them on the platform, and they
Yeah.
could eventually become a future guest. You don't know.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I love the writing of my former colleague, Megan McCarran.
Yes.
She does a lot of work now for the New York Times and um, has a newsletter, and I just think that she's, so incisive, and I think one of those writers where, she writes about so many different topics within food, but she just got such a specific point of view, for everything she writes that to me always feels very queer. I have to shout out, less of a person and more of a project, but also a person.
Okay.
Um, in my neighborhood, there is this project called Dave's Lesbian Bar, and for a couple years, they've been trying to open up a queer lesbian bar in Western Queens and doing that by throwing all these amazing events. They're always popping up at sort of bars and restaurants around the city and, like, the open streets around the city and doing really cool things, and so I just, love anything that's trying to create. They ultimately wanna open up an intersection of a bar and sort of a community mutual aid space, and I
It's
think that
awesome.
yeah,
That's
no,
amazing.
I more just desperately want this to exist, and
Yeah.
so I have to shout them out, and also a publication, and I don't think that they're explicitly queer, but I do know that Cake Zine publishes a lot of queer writers.
Cake scene is
um
amazing.
yeah, I love them, and I think they're just publishing such great, interesting work. I think that's an example of also, sort of each issue has a theme, and then
Mhm.
I'll read it, and I'm like, "This is extraordinary how people have interpreted this theme." Um,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of great queer food writing in there, and so I think just as
Yeah.
a place to find more queer voices,
Mhm.
that's
The forbidden fruit issue,
oh my god, it was so good. So
so
that's one
good.
where I've definitely found a lot of other great sort of queer voices and queer writing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I have, like, really enjoyed this conversation.
This has been so wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Like, of course, like, next time I'm in New York, I just wanna, like, let's go get
Please,
coffee
please
and
let me
just,
know.
like,
Yes, I
vent.
would
We
love
can
that,
vent. We can be each other's vent instead of our spouses.
truly.
That's episode 5 with Jaya Saxena. I hope it inspires you to read deeply, write thoughtfully, and keep pushing queer food writing forward. Now go follow Jaya. Your reading list will thank you. Take care.